Hi guys, Dr. Rob Barrington here with some more nutrition advice. I wanted to talk about soybeans, the isoflavonoids in soy and how they may relate to health, and I wanted to have a bit of a discussion on the production of Equol. So soybeans have got a number of nutrients in them that may confer health benefits to those people who regularly consume products made from soybeans. And in particular, there are three isoflavonoids, also called isoflavones, which are present in soybeans that are particularly of interest. Those three isoflavonoids are daidzein, genistein, and there is another one called glycine. Now, in particular, I wanted to talk about daidzein because there's a lot of research at the moment looking at how daidzein is metabolized in humans and how this can have effects towards the cardiovascular system. Soy is generally regarded as beneficial to prevention of cancer, and a lot of this evidence comes from epidemiological studies which shows an association between those people who consume high amounts of soy and soy products and a reduced risk of prostate and breast cancer. Now that's very interesting, and the evidence for that is accumulating, and although most of it is based on epidemiological studies, there is a lot of evidence that these isoflavonoids from soy can act as estrogen antagonists, and therefore there is a mechanistic way in which they may actually prevent cancer. So that's very interesting, but it's not what I wanted to talk about today. What I wanted to talk about is actually the cardiovascular benefits. Now, daidzein is an isoflavonoid found in soy. Daidzein is actually the A-glycone form. In soy, this A-glycone form is actually bound to various sugars, and therefore it's found in soybeans as a glycoside. And this is common for flavonoids. Most flavonoids in nature are found bound to sugars, and that's the way that plants produce them. When we take in daidzein, something interesting happens to it. A lot of it passes to our colon. Now, I've talked about the colon before. The colon really traditionally was seen as a place where water absorption came after most of the nutrients had already been absorbed from food, and it was the small intestine that was really seen as the important part of the gut where nutrients were absorbed. More recently, there's a lot of evidence to show, and this is starting to now accumulate, and there's a lot of research interest in this area. A lot of researchers start to show that the colon is really like a metabolic reactor. It's very important to human health, and this relates to the presence of microorganisms that live in our colon. These microorganisms appear to metabolize various foods, substances, and they produce a lot of metabolites that are then subsequently absorbed by the host, and these metabolites can actually benefit the health. Some examples of those are certain vitamins. Vitamin K, for example, is produced in the gut in reasonably high amounts, and that vitamin K significantly contributes to the vitamin K intake that person would have. There are various B vitamins that are produced. And there is also short-chain fatty acids that are one of the byproducts of the fermentation of fibers by microorganisms, and these again have very important health effects, and these are actively being researched. Getting back to daidzein, when daidzein reaches the colon, it's actually metabolized into a substance called Equol. And this Equol is absorbed, and it appears to have beneficial cardiovascular effects. Now, these effects are currently being researched, and therefore it's not exactly clear what cardiovascular effects as a whole it has, but there are some tentative pieces of information that have been gleaned to date. In particular, endothelial function appears to be improved by Equol, and that means the flow characteristics of blood through the arteries is a more healthy pattern. One of the things that happens when people develop cardiovascular disease is the flow pattern through the arteries deteriorates. and the way that the arteries dilate in response to flow and pressure is actually detrimental to the overall health of the person, and therefore the Equol appears to improve the flow dynamics of arteries. There are possibly other effects. There may be blood pressure lowering effects, and that would obviously relate to the ability of the arteries to dilate. And therefore, because blood pressure and artery dilation is an important risk factor for cardiovascular disease, Equol is actually seen as is now being researched actively as a cardioprotective nutrient. So that's all well and good. If you eat your soy, you produce you take in Daidzein. That Daidzein goes to the colon. That is then metabolized by our microorganisms to Equol. The Equol is absorbed, and that Equol has, through mechanisms that aren't fully understood, benefits to the cardiovascular system. And we could speculate on how those benefits manifest themselves, but it's likely, and there is evidence that Equol is a much better antioxidant than Daidzein. Some of the Daidzein is absorbed as Daidzein in the aglycone form. It's probably conjugated, and there's various other metabolites of Daidzein. It's very complex to follow these metabolites through the body, but Daidzein does get into the body. But what tends to happen is the Daidzein is rapidly metabolized, it's rapidly excreted, and it's not as good an antioxidant as Equol, which stays around for longer in the tissues. It's not metabolized so quickly, and therefore, if it is an antioxidant effect that these two compounds are having, the one that has the stronger antioxidant effect and the one that stays around in the body for longer is going to have a more beneficial effect, and that appears to be Equol. So this might be why Equol has these particular effects. It's not that I don't think they're unique to Equol, but Equol certainly is one of the end products of consuming soy, and it does appear to have beneficial effects. Now, the pivotal part of this story, which is interesting, is that not everybody produces Equol. There have been lots of studies that have looked at what are termed Equol producers and Equol non-producers. There is a certain percentage of the population that is unable to make Equol. It's unable to synthesize Equol, and this has been termed the Equol non-production phenotype, whereas those people that produce Equol have been given the title of the Equol producing phenotype. Now, phenotype. This is where I wanted to put my my input in, because this is a contentious issue, and I wanted to just discuss this and clear some things up from my perspective of how I see this. When you relate something to a phenotype, what you're really talking about is the physical characterization of a gene. If we talk about a genotype, we're talking about a particular genetic trait on the gene. If we talk about a phenotype, what we're really talking about is a physical expression of that gene. So brown hair, for example, would be a phenotypic characteristic. Now, it's concerning that this has been labelled as a phenotypic expression, because it appears to be clear that in order to produce Equol, there are no human genes involved. The genes that are required for the production of Equol are in microorganisms. They're in bacteria, and therefore it's not really it seems to be a misnomer in terms of the fact that labeling something as a phenotype indicates that it's an expression of the person's genes. So I wanted to clear that up, because it's really pivotal in understanding how this all works. If you assumed that this was a phenotypic expression of a genotype and that this was a human characteristic, you may infer that if you're a non-producer, that you're stuck with that inability to produce Equol, and that's not true. If we actually have a look at the scientific literature and what's been studied about Equol, what we tend to find is that those people that are unable to produce Equol are not able to produce Equol because they don't have the right bacteria in their gut. It's nothing to do with them physically, it's nothing to do with their genes. They simply have a colon that doesn't contain the right bacteria to be able to convert the Daidzein into Equol. So the next question to ask is, can you take somebody that doesn't have the right bacteria, can you give them the right bacteria, and would they then produce Equol? And then they would then obviously derive all of the health benefits that those people who are Equol producers are obtaining. And the answer appears to be yes. There's a number of lines of evidence for this. Firstly, there have been artificial colons set up, simulations of what a human colon would be, and you can actually seed them with the correct bacteria. There are a number of different bacteria that are able to convert Daidzein into Equol. Some of the lactobacillus bacteria, Enterococcus, or another group of bacteria that seem to be able to convert Daidzein into Equol. But there are a large number. It's not a single bacteria. So really what we're talking about is the microbiology populations, the colonization, and I've talked about this before, how a healthy gut it relates to a healthy person. You've got to have the right populations of bacteria in your colon in order to be able to produce the right metabolites, in order to be able to then absorb those metabolites and have the health effects. And I've talked extensively about this with short-chain fatty acids. Short-chain fatty acids are produced by particular bacteria, and they have health effects. And if you don't have high amounts of those bacteria in your colon, you can't produce high amounts of short-chain fatty acids, and therefore you can't derive those health benefits. And this appears to be a very similar situation. Now, if you take an artificial colon which is unable to produce Equol from Daidzein, and you actually seed it with the correct bacteria, that colon is then able to produce Equol from Daidzein. So that's the first line of evidence, but it's an in vitro study, so it's not 100% relative. It's not 100% relevant to animals and humans. Other studies have looked at rats. Rats that are non-Equol producers can actually have gut bacteria transferred from Equol producing rats into their colons, and after a certain amount of time they then start to be able to produce Equol. So it does appear from lines of evidence within the nutritional research, nutritional literature, that non-Equol producers are Equol producers because of the lack of bacteria. And it appears that it could be that if you could put those bacteria in those people, they would then be able to produce Equol, and that would then improve their health. Now, what sort of people can't produce Equol? Well, this is again an area of ongoing study, and it's not fully understood, but we do have some little clues that we can look at, some little Easter eggs that we can infer what might actually give us the ability to produce Equol. One of the substances that's been associated with Equol production is polyunsaturated fatty acids. So polyunsaturated fatty acids are a large heterogeneous group of fatty acids, but they tend to be found in plants, and that is quite an important clue there. Again, so this may relate to not actually relating to polyunsaturated fatty acids. It may actually relate possibly to the consumption of vegetable material and plant material. Another thing that appears to be able to improve the ability to and is associated with Equol production is the consumption of alcohol. Alcohol has many health effects, and if one of those health effects is the fact that it allows people to become Equol producers, it allows them to convert Daidzein to Equol, and then you from that you derive benefits to the cardiovascular system. That may be one of the reasons that alcohol is cardioprotective. That's another reason to drink moderate amounts of alcohol. It's also interesting, going back to the link to plants and polyunsaturated fatty acids, that vegetarians also appear to have higher numbers of Equol producers in their ranks. So about 60% of vegetarians are Equol producers, whereas only about 20% of non-vegetarians are Equol producers. So this is evidence that it's possibly something to do with plant diets, high quality diets. There's another study that looked at fat levels, and it appears that those people with very high amounts of fat in their diet may actually be Equol non-producers. So it could be that lower levels of fat are required for these bacteria, and it was also related to the amount of carbohydrate. Those people with more carbohydrate in their diet were actually more likely to be Equol producers, and again that might relate to the plant material. Those people with higher amounts of plant foods in their diets may actually be able to produce Equol more easily. Now, there have been studies that have attempted to upregulate equol production by increasing soy. Um, the line of thinking for this goes that if equol is produced from daidzein, if you provide more daidzein to the colon, perhaps this would cause the bacteria that are obviously metabolizing daidzein, they're obviously deriving some benefit through their metabolism. It might be that you could upregulate the amount of equol producing bacteria in the gut. However, studies that have fed large amounts of soy to people have really found that it doesn't actually increase the amount of equol they produce. So it's some other factor in the diet other than the amount of soy you eat. In other words, eating more soy, if you're a non-equol producer and you eat soy, you won't produce equol. If you eat more soy, you still won't produce equol. It's something else in the diet. So if we take this as a whole and we look at this, of all of the bits of evidence, what we tend to find is it's the usual story. Those people that are eating foods that are generally good for the health, so carbohydrate, plant-related diets, moderate amounts of alcohol, they're not consuming too much fat. You go through the list of things that seem to allow people to produce and harbour the microorganisms that allow them to produce equol. They seem to be related to high quality diets. And again, this gets back to everything I've been saying in my videos and the things that I write, the articles I write on my blog. High quality diets have so many benefits because there's so many different facets to them. They work in so many different ways. And this is just another example of how you can you can actually create a healthy gut, a healthy microbial population in your gut that is going to produce and metabolize useful substances for you. Those people with low quality diets, one of the things that appears to happen is that the quality of the microbial populations shifts towards detrimental microorganisms in their colon, and this causes a breakdown in all sorts of ways. They stop producing some of the useful metabolites from those bacteria. They also start to produce levels of toxins. There is a growth of yeast. The reduction in the amount of short chain fatty acids goes down, which changes the pH. The pH rises in the colon. This allows more detrimental microorganisms to grow. And this snowballs into ill health, and this is one, and I think it's an overlooked area of health. Keeping your colon healthy, high amounts of fiber, high amounts of natural plant materials that are required by these bacteria it is pivotal to health. And going back again to the plant material, if it appears, and it does from the scientific literature, that it's plant foods that appear to be associated with equol production, that's very interesting because plant foods contain fiber, and we know that fiber changes the microbial populations of the colon to be one that is more beneficial to health. And it might be that these two factors are put together, and it might actually be the fiber content of the food that is important, because it acts as a substrate to bacteria. It allows them to grow, it keeps them healthy, and that keeps the host healthy as well. So really, this story is unfolding, and it's something that's that's quite interesting. If you're interested in nutrition and you don't know what equol is, and you haven't really looked into this, it is actually an area of nutrition that's I think going to become quite important. And I don't think just because of daidzein being converted to equol, I think what is going to happen over the next 10 years is a lot of these substances that we've looked at in the diet are going to be found to be important foods or metabolites or substrates for bacterial metabolism, and it's going to be the products of this metabolic activity in the bacteria of our guts that is actually going to be shown to be very pivotal to our health. And I think this all relates back to dietary fiber and how the bacteria in our colons appear to thrive on particular types of dietary fiber. So it's just another reason to emphasize a high quality diet with high amounts of fiber, and it's another reason to emphasize that those people that consume a Western diet who have low amounts of fiber, high amounts of refined carbohydrate, it's another reason to emphasize that they should really reconsider what they're eating, because they probably don't understand how much of a detrimental effect that's having on their health, their performance, their physical performance, their mental performance, and how much they actually they get out of their day, and ultimately how therefore it affects their life and their lifestyle. So at least that's the way I see it. That's my input. As always, eat well, stay healthy, and protect yourself. I hope you found that interesting, and I will see you soon for another video. Please take care.